Today, I'm here to talk with you about the Unwind series by Neal Shusterman. And essentially, it's one of my favorite book series. The series is about a bunch of different kids who become unwound. And now, essentially, what that is these kids are sent by their parents or by the state, which I'll get into in a minute, to be taken apart for parts, such as their hands, their arms, legs, like organs for transplants, etc. And there are basically, I would say, about 4 types of people that are sent to be unwound. So you have, number 1 is the unruly, misbehaving children whose parents will send the unwind order when they feel that there is nothing left to do with them, besides get them to become as a better purpose, as the book would say. I actually have a bookmarked here for that. And so basically they'll say that it says, while parents love their children, a process could be set up to allow for the institution of death penalty for rebellious children, according to the Arkansas Times. They point out that the course of action involved in sentencing a child to death is described in the Bible and would involve judicial approval. While it is unlikely that many parents would seek to have their children killed by the government, such power would serve as a way to stop rebellious children. And this was an actual article in the Huffington Post, posted on October 8th in 2012. And so that's something that I'll discuss a little bit later about how the author actually brings in outside articles from the real world that really show that, this is even the smallest possibility that it could happen. And then the second type of children that are sent to be unwound are sent by the state. And these are like wards of the state. So one of our main characters, Risa, is a ward of the state, and essentially they need to prove themselves worthy. Like they need to be super talented at something for them not to be unwound. And from the ages of 13 to 18 is when you can unwind your children. They find that this is a way to cut down on state expenses towards these children that have been abandoned, like at a fire station or at different areas where they no longer want to take care of them. Our third type is an interesting type. They're called tithes. And essentially they are religious people that are sent to be unwound by choice. So they're raised from birth believing that God wants them to be unwound and to give to the greater good. And essentially they believe that they're doing something for a bigger purpose. And they are treated extra special at these harvest camps, they're called, but like the kids that resent them call them the chop shops. And they get a whole separate area. They get treated very nicely, and they get conditioned because they want the muscles and the brain and everything to be in really good shape for whoever receives it. And that's essentially what they do their whole life too. They really make sure that they keep themselves in good physical condition, mental condition, etc. And that's an interesting aspect. And then the fourth type would be storks, which are essentially babies that are left on doorsteps. So if you don't want a baby, you can leave it on someone's doorstep, and as long as you don't get caught, it's legal. And you can even re-stork. So if you wake up before your other neighbors and they didn't see the baby, you can then go to your neighbor's house and leave them the kid. And they legally have to raise the child until they're 13, and then they can sign the order to unwind them. And these kids tend to be very, very angry. They get made fun of at school and everything. And one of our main characters throughout the series, his name is Mason Starkey. He kind of builds on that resentment within those kids, and he creates what we call the Stork Brigade. and he leads this charge of like kids that are disillusioned and just angry at the system and believe that from birth they were less than everybody else. And that would be a tough feeling to live with. I could imagine. So that's our like main types of kids that become unwound. We also have, as a result of some of these kids feeling disillusioned or angry for being unwound, they can become clappers. Now, clappers are like kids that find this like underground resistance, and they slowly over a few weeks inject them with this like explosive solution into their veins. And so then they purposely get themselves caught to go into a harvest camp. And when they get close to the like actual area where they cut kids, they will swing their arms together, or they do it in public places like schools, or I think there's a scene in a gym, just to kind of protest the injustice of, the world saying they're unwanted, and they're so angry that that this whole group will take advantage of that and kind of create this volatile solution for them. And it's sad, but that's what that's a part of these kids. I actually have another article in here about the clappers. So basically, there was actually an article published on the 30th of January in 2010 about how terrorists plan to attack Britain with bombs inside their bodies. And so basically they would be having surgical bombs put inside of them, like an explosion, and then they would it would go off. It would go off and take down the airport or the airplane. And, the airline said they were going to be looking out for it and checking for it. But that was, that happened in real world. People were going to do that and, be fine with that. And, again, I think that was crazy. I've never heard of anything like that, but, very interesting, from that perspective. These books really follow four main characters, 5. So there's Connor, who is a rebellious, troublesome kid that was signed away by his parents. You have Rita, who is a ward of the state. Lev, who was a tithe that, so Connor and Rita kind of escape the bus on the way to the harvest camp, and they take him as like a shield against the juvenile authority. They're like cops that chase them down with tranquilizer darts because they want to subdue them to get them back. And they kind of use him as a human shield. And that's kind of where our story really kicks off. And I would say Mason Starkey, who I mentioned, who's a stork. And then there's a very interesting 5th main character. I think he's officially introduced in the 2nd book, Unholy. And his name is Camus Compris, just called Cam, and he's actually a rewind. And what that means is they made him from the parts of other people. And so they took, like, his face, for instance, is made up of every skin tone color they could find. He got an arm from a really good baseball pitcher. He got really good track running legs. He had the hands of a guitarist. He had a portion of his brain from a math whiz. And they like stitched them all together. And somehow, a person was made, which I think is one of the main parts of this series, is kind of questioning what makes a person a person. And especially the soul. Like, I feel like this whole series really discusses, if you're unwound, where do these pieces of your soul go? Which, again, is just something that, like, I had personally never thought about before taking on this series. And I think it's a very valid and interesting question. Because, they have you go through this whole experience of this unwinding for this one kid, and he kind of like, his consciousness like fades away, but he's there the whole time. And you get the perspective of someone who received like an arm from somebody, and he says that when he gets angry, that fist will clench, and so it's like that arm can still feel that feeling, and you just kind of have to wonder if pieces of your soul get split up. Is there a soul, etc. And I found another really good portion about like the soul in general. So this is a real article again that was published about documented cases of cellular memory being transferred to heart transplant recipients. So there was a Spanish-speaking vegetarian who received the heart of an English speaker, and they started using English words that they didn't know, and they began craving and then eating like meat and greasy foods, which they have never done. Second case, 8-year-old girl who received the heart of another 10-year-old girl, and she had nightmares about the 10-year-old being murdered, and she knew all of the details that only that girl would have known, and they actually caught the murderer and like convicted the case because of it. And just the other case is a 3-year-old Arab child received the heart of a Jewish child, and when he woke up, he started asking for Jewish candy that he had never heard of before or asked for before. So I think that's like a real world example. That stuff actually occurred, and I think that would be an interesting case study to look into and like research. And I think that's what Neal Shusterman was really trying to do with this series, was like take all these bits and pieces from our real world and kind of question, could this really happen? Do you think society would get this far? And if it did, what other questions come into play, like the soul and whatnot. And you have to, I feel that you have to wonder about that throughout this entire series, really. Yeah. And there's essentially, you learn a little bit about the person that invented unwinding throughout, I want to say the third and fourth books. And you learn that, in the end, this scientist and his scientist wife actually end up regretting ever coming up with this solution for society. And, you kind of get their perspective on how this was never what they intended and whatnot. And I think that is, again, another good message for young adults, who I would say this series is targeted mostly at, to see that, good intentions don't always equal good results. And I think that that's a really good message, and to show that, don't want to spoil too much, but they do end up trying to make up for those actions the best they can. And so it's like, it brings in that question of, do these really good multiple actions cancel out this really, really bad action that they unintentionally bad action that they did? And, it's another one of those dilemmas on like, you decide, but kind of an interesting concept. And another thing I wanted to touch on was proactive citizenry is the group that came up with this solution. It was like the company that the scientists had worked for that introduced unwinding. And what I find special about this book and this whole series is that the author puts in these advertisements that the characters like hear on TV or hear in the radio or see up on billboards. And I feel like it really pulls you in and immerses you in the story, and kind of explains where everything came from. So, there's one where it's like, it says, following is a paid political advertisement. My grandma won't talk about it, but she remembers a time when cars burned in the street and bars on windows weren't enough to keep the danger out. She remembers feral teens terrorized our neighborhood and no one felt safe. And they're saying, well, it's happening again. The Cap 17 law would let thousands of 17-year-old incorrigibles back into the streets and severely limits the age for which parents can choose unwinding. And it's sponsored by Mothers Against Bad Behavior. And I find that, really interesting because that was the premise of why unwinding was invented. There was a lot of homeless children whose parents didn't want them, and so they just put them out on the street, and then they became feral, in the words of the proactive citizenry, that they would try and break into houses for food or stores or whatnot. And so I feel like the government in this book really used that fear as a tactic, like as a marketing ploy to be like, well, one way to do that would be to go for unwinding and get them off the streets. And then they could actually be productive members of society and give their bodies to those who would use them properly, and they had a quote about, hold on, let me just pull it up. Oh, so another advertisement they had was, how many times have you reached for a word that's on the tip of your tongue only to have it slip away? How often have you tried to memorize a phone number only to lose it a moment later? You can try NeuroWeave. Now, but they're expensive and come preloaded with their own information, not yours. But now there's ThinkFast, the neurological storage system you've been waiting for. ThinkFast is a living implant the size of a dime that is inserted discreetly behind the ear, augmenting your memory with millions of healthy young neurons harvested from prime unwinds. Never forget a name or a birthday or an anniversary ever again. And so one of these things that the book kind of touches on in the series as a whole is that not only is unwinding used for people that are sick, that need a kidney transplant or need a new heart and, they wouldn't live without it. But there's like a cosmetic aspect to it as well, where people can improve their brain functions with, added neurons. They can get smooth skin, they don't have to have wrinkles anymore, age anymore. And essentially it kind of teaches that the rich, mainly the people that can really afford this, can essentially replace their body so ever so slowly so that they can live for years upon years and not have to die for a long time. And there's a juvie cop that you kind of follow a little bit who has a grudge against one of our main characters. And so he wants his eyes, and like that's his main goal. And so he tries throughout this series to like match them, and he keeps grabbing trapping unwinds, which is something that parts pirates do for the black market. And his only condition when he turns them over is that he gets their eyes, because he's trying to match Connor's eyes, which is a little creepy. But so I think not only is it again the good intentions aspect of it started out as a way for people to not have to die anymore, to not have to wait for organs. And, slowly it just becomes this way of like, don't you want to never forget things ever again? Don't you want to change your eye color, change your skin tone, whatever you feel like, as long as you're rich enough? And I think that's another aspect that plays into it, is the wealth and privilege aspect that he kind of touches on. And I think that's a really good thing to think about, in a world like this. So, all in all, I definitely think it's a really good book series. The first one is, again, Unwind by Neal Shusterman. And it is just an interesting concept overall. I think it was a very good book for me to read as a young adult, to kind of question society. You're always told that like the government knows best, your parents know best, but like it really makes you question if that's really what it is. If you should 100% believe them all the time, or if you should sometimes question their choices and maybe, stop society from going down the wrong path, because it can quickly blow up in a way that you wouldn't expect. So, definitely recommend all 4 books of the Unwind series. And I hope you enjoyed my little chat.